Hey guys, it's Oscar, and on the Space Couch today I'm going to be reviewing this, a real classic, Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. Obviously she sadly passed away a couple of weeks ago, which is what prompted me to reread this, and I'm now about halfway through Vampire Lestat. But yes, I met her once, as some of you may know from one of my previous videos, almost 30 years ago now. She would have been the age then that I am now, in the Hungry Mind bookstore in St. Paul, Minnesota, during my college abroad there, back in 1992 to 1993. So yes, Interview with the Vampire, classic of the genre, the most influential vampire novel since Dracula. It spawned many, many sequels, and her other writings as well, The Mayfair Witches, what have you. But yes, I'd forgotten a lot of this. The story of Louis Dupont du Lac telling his life story as a vampire to a young guy who's recording all on tape. So it's when he's a slave owner in the late 1700s in French Louisiana. He gets turned by Lestat into a vampire. What happens to them after? Obviously, then turning the child Claudia into a vampire. Full spoilers in this video, by the way. If you haven't read this book, it came out in 1976. And then their life, the three of them, in New Orleans, with Claudia for nearly 100 years. And then Claudia and Louis turn against Lestat, try and kill him, and they flee to Paris, looking, well, not initially to Paris, to Europe, looking for other vampires to find out more about their kind, because Lestat had told Louis and Claudia nothing. And eventually they make their way to Paris, where they do meet other vampires in the theatre of the vampires, led by the vampire Armand, who becomes a very significant character over the course of the Vampire Chronicles. Lestat turns up, Claudia and Madeleine, who Claudia's convinced Louis to turn into a vampire, so she will have Madeleine to basically look like she's her mother, because Claudia is a child, can't do anything in the mortal world. And he can then go off and be with Armand. So yes, unfortunately Claudia and Madeleine get killed by the other vampires, because the Lestat's turned up, and it is one of the only rules they have is do not kill your own kind. But they let Louis get away with it because it was more Claudia's idea. And then it's basically what happens to Louis after that, just wandering through the world, I guess, with Armand for a long time, and how he then stumbles across Lestat back in New Orleans. I'm not sure, when would that have been? Was it in the 1920s, maybe? I think, or the 1930s it is by then. And he's just a mess, and he wants forgiveness and all of that. And that's basically is the end of the story. And it's a great story. There were some things I had really forgotten, like her writing. I loved it at the time, raced right through the book. This time it took me a couple of weeks to get through it, although I wasn't reading it constantly. The writing was a bit more flowery than I remembered from this, although I did remember it being like that in her much later novels, which is one of the problems I had with the later novels. And yeah, the objectification of children is kind of disturbing to modern sensibilities as well, with Claudia and with the two young boys that she prepares for Lestat in their flat, drugged, so he will drink from them both and be weak enough for them to kill him. That was a little bit disturbing, and obviously Armand's only about 16 or 17 in human terms. There's a lot of that through all of her books, regardless of the genre that it's in. And obviously nowadays that is much more difficult to just let go. But yes, Interview with the Vampire is a great book. This, Dracula by Bram Stoker, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein make a great trilogy of books. They're all written in almost the same sort of manner. It's fantastic. The language is very similar. But yes, thoroughly enjoyed this. As I said, I'm now on the Vampire Lestat, about 260 or so pages into it, and so I'm sure we shall have a review in due course of that. And it's much more complicated than this one. I love the backstory of Lestat. It is fantastic, and in that there's so much more I'd forgotten that I'm rediscovering again. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed. Please subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this content. Leave me a comment suggestion of what topic you'd like to see discussed, or like the video.